cool. So we'll kind of just walk it through both sides. Obviously, the buyer and the seller, the process is gonna be the same. There are gonna be a couple differing things that you're gonna do depending on the side you're on. So we'll stop and talk about that. But let's just imagine that we were the buyer, because there's typically a little bit more, not work, but coordinating and things to do as the buyer side, since you have the rights to do other things, right? Inspections, so on and so forth. So you get a home under contract, right? Meaning that you've got fully executed documents. So the first thing is to make sure that you actually have fully executed documents. That sounds really simple and really stupid, but like making sure that it's a legally binding contract. Because the reason we want that, one, to make sure that you actually are under contract, and two, so that you have an effective date and you know what that effective date is, right? So when I get a contract, the first thing I do after I double check that it is legally binding is I set those dates out for me. Like, okay, how long is my inspection period? When is my closing date? How long do I have for a loan commitment? Stuff like that. I need to know the effective date of that in order to know all those dates, right? So I look at it and make sure I know the effective date. If it's today, the 16th, great, and I have 10 days for inspections, I know. And I make a list of all the stuff. Okay, your inspection period ends here, your closing date is here, your loan commitment period is here, all that stuff. So I lay out all the important time frames that I have as a buyer, and you should do this as a seller as well, so that you're aware the buyer has to do these things within the set amount of time. Right. Inspection is going to be the first and most important one. The other thing is also earnest money, right? So as buyers and sellers, you need that earnest money deposited via wire, a check, whatever it may be. So you need to know when that deadline is, right? So especially if it's on the weekend, and it's only 3 days, you got to know, okay, if I only have one business day to get to it, I better get to it on that day. So step one, making sure you know all the deadlines, all the dates, all the stuff like that, so that you can adequately keep up with the timeline of the whole transaction, right? After that, as a buyer's agent, you really need to start talking to your buyer about inspections and what you want to do. I always kind of advise buyers, or my buyers, to do inspections on the first half of their period, whatever that is. If it's 10 days, do it in the first 5 days. If it's 6 days, do it in the first 3, for a couple of reasons. One, it gives you time to get a specialist back in there if you need it. And what I mean by that is,
like mold specialist.
Yeah, if they call out something, if you need a structural guy and you didn't originally order one, or a plumber or an electrician or a roof, whatever it is that you didn't originally get and you want additional commentary on, you still have the remainder of that period to do so. Also, especially first-time home buyers, they just maybe competed with 5 other offers, or they're spending a lot of money. They're so excited, and then they're going to pay, $800 to $1,000 for inspections, and they're going to get a 60-page report that tells them why their house sucks. Right? That's a big emotional roller coaster for a buyer to ride. I want to make sure
if they get that done at the end of their inspection period, they kind of screw themselves, because then they take on that huge packet of papers saying everything that's wrong. They didn't have time to prepare themselves for what they're getting themselves into, and they're just kind of stuck.
Yeah, and it's more so just so that they can understand what it means, right? A lot of that stuff is very legal, professionally written, light and operable. Go change the light bulb, right? Those 2 sentences sound completely different, especially when you're compounding on stuff. So it gives them time to digest, gives us time to then talk, on the phone or in person about what it actually means. What does it mean when they say that the HVAC needs to be serviced? Also, what is the cost of that? Or what is the cost of this? Or what's this actually going to be? Is this a major concern, or am I going to find this in every other home that I buy? And so it's educating your buyers so they understand what's going on.
It's kind of like taking a part of the dealership for an inspection. They're going to give you a huge list of things that's wrong with it that they say needs to be done, but what is actually important to you, and what.
Yep. And it's also important to remind your buyers that the inspectors work for them, right? They hired them, they paid for them. Their job is to not only tell them what is wrong, first and foremost, make sure everything works. It's also informational. It's knowledge. You're about to buy something. When you go buy a dishwasher from Nebraska, you get a manual on how to work it. Your inspection report is your manual on how to work your house. So it's not just saying, oh, this is all catastrophically wrong. It's, hey, this is what you're purchasing. Here's the knowledge you need to make sure that you maintain it, just so you know where this is, where the hot water shutoff is, just so you understand what you own, right? So it's giving them time to do that. So usually within day 1 or 2, I set up a time with my buyers to order those inspections, right? Whoever you order them from, go over what inspections they want to get done on that property at the beginning, whether that's the whole boat of them, based on if there was prior inspections, things like that. You just talk to your buyers about that and get that scheduled sooner than later. Depending on who you use, they may be busier. You may have certain time frames. I always try to do that as soon as I can. Get them scheduled. As the buyer's agent, you should let the listing agent know when they're going to be with as much advance notice as possible, especially if the sellers are still living in there. Now, understand the contract says the seller has to give you reasonable access to the home to inspect. Reasonable is a very subjective term. Reasonable in my mind is 24 hours or more. Reasonable is not, hey, it's 9 a.m. and I want to do inspections at 11. If you have a family who has 2 small kids, that's just be understanding about how quickly you're trying to turn things around. If that needs to happen, call the listing agent and say, hey, I've got this scenario. Like, can I get somebody out there in a couple hours?
What can we do to make this work?
The sellers can stay. I don't care. How is this okay? I apologize for the short notice, but get them as much advance notice. Hey, we're doing inspections at 3 o'clock on Tuesday, doing as many of them as I can at once so that I don't have to inconvenience the seller, my buyer, everything. I can get all the information at once. Right, so we've got earnest money deposited. We've made sure the contract is legally binding. We've got our dates set out, and we've scheduled inspections. Right. The next part is going through inspections and just letting inspectors and professionals give you information. I try to really not predict anything during this period because I don't know. I'm not an inspector. My job is to guide and advise at this point, right, and interpret the information that I'm given. So as a buyer's agent, I'm there during inspections, or someone from my team is there for the entirety of inspections, assuming I can't be there. I want to make sure that I'm hearing from the inspector firsthand so that I can help them explain the ins and outs of it. As the listing agent, typically you're not there, but a lot of times as a listing agent, I like to go for what's called the summary. So the summary of the inspection is that ending period, the last 20 minutes when the inspector's talking to the buyer and saying, hey, here's the list of the highlights I found. Right, here's just the kind of overview. I, as a listing agent, always ask the buyer's agent if they mind if I show up for that. It's a request that needs to be made, right? Now, the buyer's agent and the buyers may say, look, I really would just rather it be my agent myself. That's totally okay. I would also say 90% of the time people don't care. The only reason I want to be there is just, again, as a listing agent, I want to hear it directly from the inspector and not necessarily, through the grapevine and playing telephone of real estate. Yeah. And I'm not saying that I don't trust people and whatnot, but things get interpreted the more they get passed on from person to person. I just want to set my expectation as well. If I hear of an issue, I want to be able to say, okay, well, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, here's what the report that I heard. I don't know what they're going to do, but we may have an issue that we need to be prepared to have a conversation about. Yeah. If that makes sense, right? So as a listing agent, I always do request that, if possible, to make it there and do all that. Any questions before we kind of get going even deeper into the contract about inspections, earnest money, dates, effective dates, stuff like that?
Good.
The other thing I would say as well, too, is make sure you get the contract to the appropriate people, right? So I kind of skipped that, but right when you look at it, make sure it's effective. And if it needs to go, if you're a buyer, get it to your lender. If they're getting a loan, if you're a listing agent, get it to your title company as well. And if you're not using the listing agent's title company as a buyer, you got to send it to your title company too, and so that they can begin to work on it. Again, that's why that effective date is important. Do you have a 2-week close? And if so, you should be cash, and so you need to let title know, hey, we need to go quickly. Or do you have a 60-day close and say, hey, here's a contract. Can you get working on title, prelim, stuff like that? So make sure that all appropriate parties have a copy of the contract. I always like to send my clients a copy too, just so they have it at all times. Yeah, I send them an email with all of them and say, hey, here's a copy of your executed contract. Let's set up a time to talk for inspections. Any questions so far? Cool. So we do inspections, right? This is where it starts to get very specific on what your contract states your rights are to do, right? So in this market, you're probably some degree of as is, right? Whether you have the right to ask for stuff or not. Once you've conducted your inspections, you should schedule a time to talk to your buyer about that. And I always say, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go review the report that you'll get emailed or whatnot. I'm going to do the same. And when we connect on the phone, I want you to tell me what you're concerned with and or what you don't understand. Right now, I want to match it up to the list of items that I think they should be concerned with and or aware of. And then we just talk through those, right? Is this a major issue? What's the cost of this? Do we need to have a plumber or an electrician come back? Or is it something we can get quoted out verbally? We can send the report to people. Do we need a mold specialist? Do we need whatever it is, right? Once we've conducted everything that we need to do, we're either satisfied or we're not satisfied with the stuff. And so at that point, before your inspection period's up, you need to to denote and let the listing agent know what your plan is as the buyer to move forward. Are you going to accept it, or are you going to execute your right to cancel and get your earnest money back? In a normal market or a market that's not as competitive as this, you would have the right to renegotiate on resolutions, and you may have that right given the property again specifically. And if which case you just need to make sure that you get your resolution submitted prior to your the expiration of your inspection period. After that, your next real big piece is for your buyer to work with their lender. Again, we're going to assume that they're getting a loan to get through underwriting and to get that appraisal ordered. Again, back to the very beginning, I need to know how quickly I need to move on this, right? So if I only have 3 weeks with a loan, you better be rocking and rolling pretty quickly and getting that appraisal ordered probably day one. Versus if I have 60 days, I would tell my lender, the buyer's lender, to wait until I get through inspections to order that appraisal if possible. It's a cost to the buyers, and so if we are going to cancel, I don't want to cost them $500, and especially if we're not pressed for time. But then after you're through inspections, the next point is really just to let the lender do their thing in terms of an appraisal. So as a buyer's agent, you can just you're just notifying lender, hey, we're through inspections, you're good to go on appraisal, order it if you have not already. You don't really need to let title know unless there is a change to the contract, right? So if there was a renegotiation period, or you came to a verbal agreement and put it on an amendment that the price was changing, or there was a credit for closing costs. If that changed the contract, you've got to get that updated contract to title, if that makes sense. And your lender as well. But if nothing changes, you just need to let lender know, hey, we're through. Let me know if you need anything from me. I typically then just work with the lender as they need me to help get my clients where they need to be. The lender and their team of underwriters, loan processors, and et cetera are going to start asking their buyers for documents to get them in and through underwriting. More verification, credit pulls, W-2s, pay stubs, tax returns, the works of like really making sure they're approved for this loan. Some buyers are super busy and some buyers also aren't super responsive. I always ask the lender, hey, let me know what you need and I can help push them to make sure that we meet our deadlines, right? Because we do have a loan approval contingency in this contract we have to meet, or the seller's going to gain the right to cancel on us. As the listing agent, once you're through inspections, you can just expect a phone call from the appraiser, because the appraiser is going to contact the listing agent, in which case they need to schedule through you and the seller to come and appraise the property. There are different people who do it different ways. I know people that attend every appraisal as a listing agent, and they are there and they want to just be there with the appraiser and help them if they need it. I personally do not attend it unless I have to. Again, you can talk 10 different agents, you get 5 different schools of thought. There's not a right or wrong way to do it. The right or wrong way is whatever way you want to do it for your business. When I do, as a listing agent, get a call from an appraiser, I always ask them to make sure they have everything they need. And what I mean by that is, do you have a copy of the contract? Have you seen it? Do you need it? Do you have any questions for me? Is there anything I can get to make your job easier? If it's no, great. As long as they have an iBox, or if it's a combo, I give them the code and I let them go do their thing. Even if I was worried about an appraiser, like an appraisal value, I don't think that I would show up, because I want the appraiser to do his job. I don't want him to show up and do my job, and I don't want to show up and do his job unless he or she requests help from me. Again, that's my personal preference. I know agents who show up because they're client. Now, if your client requests you to be there, different story. But typically as a listing agent, I just let them go, and then I wait to hear back from the lender, yay or nay, on the appraisal, right? So then you're kind of just working through that period. Once you're through inspections, though, as a seller, you're probably 90% of the way there. There's only a couple things that can hold up that transaction. That would be the loan approval not happening, and or an appraisal value coming in low and not being able to come to an agreement. So you're pretty close. Once you get through that, so let's say the appraisal comes back, you're good to go. You're really at like 95%, right? And so you're just making sure that you get approved from the lender in time. You let the listing agent know, and then you can start to instruct your buyer and seller, okay, let's start talking moving, closing dates, stuff like that. Lining all that stuff up so that there's not a delay or just a chaotic 24 hours for everybody involved, right? Understand that, like, as a seller, you probably typically sign a day or two early before the buyer, which is totally fine. You don't have to, but it's typically easier to schedule because you have more options. As the buyer, you pretty much got to close on the day. Potentially, you could close the day early if your lender will allow it, but they want to see that funding within 24 hours. So if you need to close earlier for for whatever reason, double check with your lender that it's going to be okay and whatnot.
Okay.
As a seller, seller's agent, I always ask that my buyer, so when a buyer is buying one of my seller's homes, I ask that they close in the first half of the day. And as a buyer's agent, I always tell my buyers we're going to close in the first half of the day, meaning between 8 and noon, right? The reason for that being is a lot of contracts are written on what's called at funding. At funding doesn't mean when the seller gets their money. It means when the money has been made available to the seller. So, AKA the check has been written for them to come pick up, or the wire has been sent. Now, depending on their bank and their personal situation, that wire may not show up until the next business day, or 2 days if their bank has, an intense security protocol and it's a big enough number that they have to verify it. That doesn't matter to me, but the fact that it gets sent, that's funding, not when you receive it. So understand that if you're closing at 3 p.m. on a Friday afternoon as a buyer, and it states you don't get possession until funding, you're not funding until Monday morning, right? So that means that you don't legally have the right to move into that property over the weekend. That's a problem, especially if you're not aware of that. Like, we probably ordered moving trucks. It's technically trespassing if the seller really wanted to play hardball, right? So like on weekends and holidays, especially make sure that you're in the morning. I had one this morning, I closed at 8 a.m. so that I can know that the funding will happen at latest midday. Because then once that happens, you're good to go. You're ready to rock and roll. Now, again, if your contract states differently, I get possession at noon or I get possession the next day. Not as big of a deal, but still we want to try and get the sellers as much money as possible as soon as they can so they're not causing another issue, right? So start to line that up and work with your title company to say, okay, when can I close this buyer? Like, the closing date is, what do you have available? Where are you going to close? Where is the buyer currently located at? If you're using Platinum, they've got locations all over the city. If your buyer's in South OP, they've got a location out there. Like, if your buyer doesn't want to drive all the way to the plaza, just go schedule the closing. Ask Courtney and say, hey, can I schedule a closing out at OP for this buyer? And she'll help you get with that person out there to schedule the closing out there to make it as convenient as possible. Name of the game is as least stress as possible.
Yeah.
The more advanced preparing you can be, again, knowing these dates, don't do all this the week of. Basically, once you're through inspections, really, I would start to have those conversations. Again, there's only a few things after inspections, barring an unforeseen, just chaotic event, that should cancel a contract. So the name of the game once you're under inspections is like timeline management and like understanding when and where you need to be and where your people need to be and what they need to do. And then educating them on what that process is going to look like, right? So closing, what's the closing process look like for a seller? It's 15 minutes. It's about a third of the papers the buyers are going to sign. If it's a loan, buyers, it's probably 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how many papers and or if they have a lot of questions. Where's the money coming from? If they got to bring, unless they're a VA loan, they got to bring money to closing. You got to have a cashier's check, cannot be a personal check or a wire. So making sure that they understand that. If they don't have that, they can go get a money order or they can talk to the title company about wiring that money to them. So I just went through it really fast in probably 20 minutes. There's a lot of stuff in between there, but the name of it is just timeline management. Again, at the beginning, knowing when I have to be stuff done, where my deadlines are, and when I have to have decisions made so that my clients understand that, whether it's the buyer or the seller, and then interpreting information as I get it. Questions throughout that process or specific questions? Travis, John, Tiffany, any questions about like what to do in a specific situation or anything like that?
I think I'm good, man.
I'm trying to think of, I made it sound super simple. It is a lot easier once you get under contract. Like, getting under contract is the hard part right now. And just understanding if you can know when you need to go places and what you need to do, you should be okay. Obviously communicating with the other side and the other agent is going to be super helpful. But the worst thing you can do is not be aware of a time frame. And then like all of a sudden it's like, holy crap, I got to have an inspection stuff submitted by today. And I haven't even talked to my buyer about it. Right. So just making sure that you're on top of that stuff up front. And then obviously throughout that process, getting paperwork to compliance. That's more so that you can get paid. So understand that you cannot be compliant and the deal can still close, right? That sounds really weird, but that's making sure that you're compliant so we can pay you. It's not unheard of for a deal to close and a commission check to be sitting there for a week because the agent isn't compliant and doesn't have all the documents they need, right? So doing all that throughout the whole process. I would recommend drastically, if you don't have one or are busy enough, to get a transaction coordinator to help you with that paperwork. We have one on our team. Even if you're an individual agent and are not doing, a ton of business, it's someone that's there that's going to help you keep paperwork straight and help you keep those deadlines in straight. And there are options out there that are very, very affordable, and it's well worth your money to make sure that you don't mess that up and make sure you know what's going on. So I won't keep rambling unless you guys have specific questions about anything else. It doesn't necessarily have to be contract related. If not, that's really all I have. It's kind of short and sweet today. There's not a ton of stuff on this one.
Do you ever do training on compliance, Ryan?
We can, yeah. So we can put one on in terms of like what you need for compliance.
Yeah, just as far as like walking through like the paperwork and stuff. To make sure. Yeah, never gone through compliance. Like I said, Amanda's done it all, so that would be helpful if it's possible.
Yeah, we can definitely put one on for next month to kind of walk through the process of submitting through command, right? And then what all you need and why you need it and where it goes. So I can let Kendall know, and we'll put it on the training calendar for next month to go through all that stuff.
Cool. Thanks, bro.
Yep. All right, guys. Thank you so much for coming. If you have any questions, just come find me. I can help you out.
Cool.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Ryan.
See you guys.